I am Ben from Team Panic. It is time to talk about how my 150-gram ant weight Squeak performed at ARC's April meet. Squeak here obviously competed in the non-destructive plastics league that ARC has, and we fought in a round-robin style tournament, so round-robin groups and then a tournament at the end, or a single elimination tournament at the end of the day. Without further ado, let's jump on into those fights. And our first fight up is up against a robot called Beast Boy. This is a wedge with articulating wedge. 3, 2, 1, go! So this fight was disappointing for a couple of reasons. First of all, Squeak has a nice little like dustpan-y type shape at the front, and I had added a piece of acetate in the front there to make a dustpan shape. However, the hammer is so heavy that as I accelerated, the whole robot lifted up even just a little bit, which meant that the first interaction we had, he got directly underneath me and carried me around, which is not great and definitely not where you want to be as a hammer. You kind of prefer to have them underneath you. Also, with such a heavy hammerhead, it's very, very easy to get turned over on the side and then kind of hard to get back down from there. Although easier in this fight because he provided a nice wedgy surface to be able to like flick back down onto the wheels from, which actually worked out pretty well in my favor in this particular fight. Well, for a little while anyway. And then, of course, we got pushed into the pit because this is the very first fight I've had with this robot, so there's lots of learning to be done on like how to take off without wheeling and where the hammer needs to sit and how fast the hammer needs to swing, because the other thing that happened in this fight was no Squeak, which was really, really annoying. This robot is called Squeak. It's got a very loud, squeaky hammer on it. It's supposed to squeak. And even in the box audio that you just heard, there was very little, if any, squeak at all in this fight. And nothing was able to be heard out by the drivers or the people watching the fights, which was disappointing. I wanted that, and I didn't get it. So yes, there is a version 2 of Squeak planned to fix that issue. In fact, I did a stream redesigning parts of the design last week. If you want to see that, I will leave links to the VOD in the description and on the end card. Anyway, moving on from that fight, we're going up against a robot we've been up against before. This is Flatpack, a robot that is completely made out of wood. It is also a wedge. 1. we got some little squeaks in here. So in this case, I'm manually articulating the weapon. Like I've got a stick on my joystick, which thrown one way pushes the weapon in a direction and thrown the other way pushes the weapon in the other direction. And I was basically in this fight wanting squeaks. So I was throwing the stick to the endpoints to basically get the maximum speed out of the motor that the Malinky in here is capable of producing. And we got tiny little baby squeaks in amongst this fight, which, you know what, I was pretty happy about that. Also in this fight, we got the first kind of use of the dustpan. I was slowing up on my accelerating at people so that I wasn't lifting off the ground at the front, and then able to get under them and then lay the hammer in on flat pack, because having another robot in the dustpan before swinging the hammer meant that the kind of mass of the hammer didn't affect the chassis as much. This hammer is actually pretty hefty at like 35-ish grams or something along those lines. So swinging it round does cause the robot to jump, as you can see here. And that basically means that, yeah, it works better when there's somebody in the dustpan. Having said that, being stuck up on the side is still an issue because, you know, this is a very large hammer, very like up off the robot, which makes driving on the side very, very difficult. But, you know, it's still not too bad. I mean, it could be worse. I can at least actually drive around on the side, and throwing the hammer around while on the side does actually like articulate the robot. So it's not like I get put on my side and I lose the fight immediately. So I'm not too unhappy with how all of that goes. Of course, though, we did still end up getting pitted here. This robot, as it turns out, is actually somewhat challenging to drive. Turns out when you put a hammer on a robot that's almost bigger than the robot is, it causes very slight control issues. Yes, so let's move on to the next fight. The next fight up is against a robot called Whipsnake 37 Trillion, which is quite the mouthful for quite a wild robot. This is a shuffling robot that has an extension mechanism as its weapon.
Well, you're close to it once it gets it. Obviously.
Get in there! Stay down! So this was a fun fight. Whipsnake, being the crazy wild design it is, yes, it is a shuffle mechanism, and yes, it uses a tape measure to do the kind of extension wedge idea, which is very, very fun. And it's a really interesting thing to try and get your head around to fight against. But also, because it is a shuffler, it gets weight in half, which meant it was much heavier than I was. So having it in the dustpan meant that I could throw the hammer around no worries at all, because the mass of Whipsnake was counterbalancing the mass of the hammer beautifully. So that was really, really cool, and meant I could fire the hammer more, and I was just having a bit more fun with that one because I was able to do that. So yes, the next version of this definitely needs a better dustpan, and possibly even weight in the dustpan itself to kind of help with the hammer swing and allow me to do that better and more often, which would be very, very cool. Also though, again, Whipsnake is a very, very cool robot. I love the extension mechanism that he's built into this thing. And I think my favorite part of the whole thing was him preventing himself from going down the pit by extending the arm out and changing the center of mass of his robot, which meant that he should have unbalanced and gone in the pit, but he actually kind of rebalanced himself to the point that one of his little shuffly feet touched the ground again, and he kind of sort of got himself out of there. Obviously, I was still on him and jamming him into the corner of the pit, so he didn't stay that way for very long. But, of course, it was impressive that he survived as long as he did. Also, this fight shows you more a little bit of like the inherent issues with throwing the hammer when nobody's in the dustpan. There was a couple of times, especially right at the end there where he was over the pit, that I threw the hammer without him in the dustpan, and the whole robot kind of like goes shunk, and like the robot comes up to meet the hammer rather than the hammer swinging, which is a bit of a pain. But with some weight balancing, we should be able to fix that issue, I hope. I think so, anyway. It's a goal for version 2. But of course, with him down the pit, that means we got the win for this fight. So let's move on to the next and final fight of our round robin group. This is against Red Plover, one of the lone bots at ARC.
2, 1, go!
That was a pretty good fight. However, there's still a thing that's kind of annoying in these fights. I didn't mention it in the whip snake fight, but very few of the squeaks are actually loud enough to penetrate the Lexan and get back out to the drivers and the audience here. So basically none of the squeaks in the whip snake fight actually got heard outside the box. In this particular fight against Red Plover, there was 2 that made it out to us outside the box, and those were the one where I fell backwards off of him, so the hammer hit the ground that way and hit more square with the weight of the robot behind it. And then also when I drove into the wall with the hammer mostly in the upright position, like that, that gave a good little squeak as well and got some sound back out towards the drivers. So again, the version 2 of this, we are going to be prioritizing hitting the ground square and hitting the ground faster, because the fact that this thing has whistles and not like little squeaky mechanisms, it really does need as much velocity as possible to get good squeaks out of it. Like if I just articulate it like this, nothing happens, but if I, whoops, if I do that, I get really good squeaks out of it. So I really want to hear this in the box and outside the box as well, obviously. So, but yes, it was still a fun fight, this one. It's interesting. The hammer mechanism, because it's a little bit slower, it's still got enough torque to like throw robots a little bit, which means that it also makes a good finisher. I can like stack somebody in the dustpan, like drive them over to the pit and throw the hammer, and that gives the last little like inertia kick needed to get them down the pit, which is of course how we won this particular fight, which at the end of our round robin group means we are on 2 wins and 2 losses, which is not bad for a first time build with a very silly weapon attached to it, and also puts us in the running for finals. However, 2 other robots in our round robin group had 2 wins and 2 losses as well, Flatpack and Whip Snake, and because of the way everything had worked out, normally there'd just be a count back, but in this particular case, there was no way to count back because we'd all won and or lost against the, like at least one of the other 2, and so it was just not possible to count it back, which meant 3-way fight.
3, 2, 1, go!
This three-way fight, I was kind of expecting to go the distance, which it did indeed do, and we'll talk about the outcome of that in just a second, because it had to be judged because it was a finals fight. Normally our draws just end up giving everybody equal points, but we couldn't do that here because somebody needed to move on to the finals. So I knew it was going to be a longer fight, so early on I focused on Whip Snake, because in our Whip Snake fight, getting Whip Snake in the dustpan meant lots of good solid hammer hits. So I wanted to rack up as many aggression points as I possibly could in the early stages of this fight. And so that's what I was doing. Targeting Whip Snake fairly heavily, getting Whip Snake in the dustpan, and then just throwing the hammer as much as possible. Somewhere along the way, something went a little bit wrong with Whip Snake, unfortunately, and their mechanism got stuck out, which kind of led to their mobility issues. And at that point, I was like, well, I'm not really gonna rack up too many points in the eyes of the judges here by going after a fairly limping robot. So I started to take the fight to flat pack instead. Again, the whole point here was to try and in the dustpan and just throw as many hammer blows in as I possibly could, because before they got away from me, to kind of try and get those aggression points up. I mean, I could have also tried, I was trying a little bit for control points, but this robot's not really designed to control. This dustpan isn't very deep, so it's kind of hard to actually get people to go where you want them to go, especially when you're firing the hammer around. It changes the weight distribution, it changes the amount of torque that you get out of the wheels and stuff, and it just means that purposely pushing people towards the pits is hard to do unless you've got one of their wheels in the dustpan, and then it becomes a little bit easier. Which, I mean, I did kind of show in the dying seconds there. I did push flat pack over towards the pit. Unfortunately, when they hit the wall, they went the wrong way. They started angling away from the pit rather than angling towards the pit, which meant more pushing on them just pushed them away, and it wasn't really in a good enough position for me to actually get them down the pit. So, of course, the fight went to the judges. And very thankfully, my attempted strategy here of going for the aggression points won out at the end of the day, because the judges awarded the fight to Squeak purely on aggression points. I mean, there was no real damage to speak of in that fight, so it was all about aggression and control, and thankfully I put in enough control that all of the aggression points that went to me swung the fight in my favor, meaning we move on to the quarterfinals. And in the quarterfinals, we meet our very first spinner in the non-destructive league. This is, of course, because ARC runs a plastic league, so any weapon types are permissible as long as the outer shell of your robot is plastic, and any weapons that you build are plastic, of a very specific list and limited quantity of materials that you can choose. So you can't really build a carbon fiber nylon spinner, because the whole idea is to be a non-destructive class. But you can still run spinners, which is what Death Skull, our next opponent, is.
3, 2, 1, go!
Oh boy, so that went well for him and badly for me. So he was running a PLA Plus drum, which is actually a fairly weak material. The teeth on PLA Plus weapons I have found in the past wear down as you go through fights. The more you hit people, the worse your drum is, and the worse it performs throughout the day. However, he did really well in this fight. Our first couple of exchanges, I got in onto him with the acetate dustpan and was able to swing the hammer in. because it's just PLA, it didn't really do any damage to the soft heads of this hammer, and everything was going pretty well. Unfortunately, there was a couple of times where I miscalculated my takeoff and got the acetate jammed directly into his drum, and when that happened, he just started tearing it apart. And as we've seen in previous fights, as soon as I lost that drum or lost that dustpan, I was in trouble, because then I can't really wedge that easily, I can't really control the fight, and I can't swing the hammer. So, well, I can swing the hammer, but it pops me up further, which means like exposing the chassis to his drum, which is just not a good spot to be in, really. So at the point where he was starting to rip up that acetate front end, I knew that I was in trouble significantly, and of course, we were in trouble. He also managed to break the back wall of the chassis here, but again, I'm not really all that surprised about this. This chassis is printed in a silk PLA. PLA in and of itself is a bad material to print chassis out of. It's too heavy and it fractures when it breaks, so you will get breaking across layer lines really easily. And silk PLA is worse, because silk PLA, the layer adhesion is lower, which means that it doesn't take a lot of force to break things through the layer lines. And when, yes, the back wall is literally just a couple of perimeters thick of plastic, that was always going to happen. Version 2 will have a stronger chassis than this, but I did this because this silk PLA looks really cool, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But of course, because nothing was out the back here that was too worrying when it got exposed, the fight didn't get cancelled when I didn't lose the fight immediately when that back piece of armor came off. So we were actually pretty good on that until, of course, we got pushed down the pit. But because that was in the finals, that was single elimination, so we are now out of the finals. And you know what? I will take getting into the quarterfinals with this robot. That was a good first experiment with the very loud hammer design. And as mentioned, I already have plenty of plans for a version 2 so that we can get better, louder squeaks out of our squeaky hammer robot. Because, I mean, win or lose, I want to be able to hear this thing outside the arena. That is really what we're in this for. Before we wrap up this video though, there is one final thing to talk about. We went in the Rumble.
3, 2, 1, go!
Maybe somebody could knock some light into it, but I don't think so. Oh, it's on now, and it's on. I don't even know how it's happening. Just let me dead. You would have been counted out by now. It's like would be like over 10 seconds. Don't give it. They're in the barrel. Oh, that.
Somebody push my dad, please.
Your back wing was
Wow!
You gotta make the sound effects. Go one more.
What do you
That one's made.
Yeah, I know. Good.
Go on, it's not
It's like IKEA.
Yeah, that'd be my fault. It is.
And I mean, I think it's really great.
You do it. And I was like, you have to.
That's it. I mean, you can. Yeah, you
They tried to do the whole game to beat this. I just want to.
Your 6 wheels.
Halfway there, 2.5 minutes left.
Thank God, you counted out. I fixed it. Come on.
He's walking off like past the pit.
I think
No one will get out now.
Probably be getting in. You're gonna knock people back again.
And you're not. What is your intention? Just drag yourself into the pit. Come on. Okay, at least try and knock somebody out there. You've got like a minute left. I think technically it's like that. Yeah, there's definitely something that.
And it's off.
I'm sorry, it broke again. Okay, that wins.
Alright, unless Flatpack can get himself out of that. Oh, he did it!
Oh, you're
I'm back.
back again. And it's
40 seconds left.
Come on, that's not what the other rolls are. Come on, quickly. Go for it.
Oh, it's back.
It's up, it's down. Yeah.
Don't push him.
Give him a whack.
Well done, Squeak.
Hey, so we won the Rumble. That was really, really cool. I kind of stuck up this end of the arena, or like up close to the camera, and was just fighting the robots that were up around there until basically all that was left was me and Spinners and Exilus. And Exilus got Death Skull stuck, and then they both went into the pit together, which was kind of cool because it took out basically what I figured was my main competition. Death Skull definitely had an edge on me. Especially just geometry-wise. Like the other little vertical spinner in there, the way that its front was shaped meant that I could get the like prongs that I've got around the outside of it pretty easily and still manage to control it pretty well despite not having a dustpan. Because I didn't put a new dustpan on for this fight, I just threw Squeak in exactly as it had come out of the quarterfinals, just for a bit of fun, really. And so yeah, we then were doing pretty well. We got the last spinner in, and the red 6-wheeled robot called 6-wheel was having lots of intermittent power issues, and you did hear Leon in the background telling the driver of that to just stop because they probably would have been counted out. Personally, I'm kind of fine with this. Like in a rumble, especially something like a very end of the day rumble, if you can get your robot back running again, I think that you should just keep fighting because rumbles are mostly for fun. And the more people in them at any given time, the more fun they are. So I was pretty happy with them jumping back into the fight and joining back in, especially the hilarious moment where they lifted up Flatpack, got Flatpack in a position where Flatpack could do nothing else, and then the robot cut out again. That was very, very funny to me. And then, of course, I went over and freed them after I'd effectively won the fight. If I'd really left that, I probably would have won it there and then. But I'm glad that I did because it meant that I got more fight. I got to push people around some more. I got to throw the hammer some more. And then I got that really, really cool pit escape where I had one wheel over the pit. and then with a little bit of a bump from somebody and throwing the hammer, the momentum was enough to get me off the pit and allow me to continue fighting, which is very cool. I will also say that half that fight I ran on only one tire. The other tire had the actual, the other wheel had the tire ripped off by Death Skull earlier in the fight, which meant that, yeah, I only had one grippy side, so my control was actually fairly low, although I wasn't as hampered by that with this design as I haven't been in other designs, and I really don't know why particularly. I would have thought that that would have made much more of an impact on the way I was driving the robot than it actually did. So that's cool. I like that. I like that, and hopefully in version 2 we keep that ability. Whatever ability is there, I hope we keep that so that I can survive the next time a tire gets ripped off a wheel, because that is not the first, and it certainly won't be the last. Anyway, that is how we did with Squeak at ARC's April meet. I hope you have enjoyed that one, and I will see you in the next video.